All right, welcome to your next lesson on I can't say percents, fractions, and decimals harder. All right, a couple things to keep in mind. This is very similar process to the basic ones, with some little twists. I'd like you to focus on the fact that just because you see a decimal in this percent, it is not in decimal form, it's a percent. And just because you see a fraction in a percent does not mean it's in fraction form. It's still a percent if you see the percent symbol. So you still have to convert it. Don't assume it's already in that decimal or fraction form. All right, while we're doing this, we're going to be looking at practice B. And a lot of our notes problems are going to actually match with this practice. So you might be doing this as an in-class thing or as homework, or you're just at home sick or whatever. But make sure you're following along with it and you can benefit from the notes today. So you can see number 7 over there correlates to number 7 over here, and 14, 19, 16, we're bouncing all over the place, 12, and that's it. Okay, so your responsibility will be to fill in the rest of that table, but we will take care of these ones with the notes today. All right, let's go ahead and walk through these. So your very first one is changing percent to a fraction. Now, we're still going to, anytime I have a percent, we realize that we can just put it over 100, and that is our fraction. The problem is you can't leave the fraction with a decimal in the numerator. That's not really a simplified form. And so we're stuck doing something else here. So my recommendation to you would be when you're going from percent to fraction and you see weird decimals or things like that, I would recommend changing it to a decimal first. We know that that just means divide by 100, so we're going to go backwards. And the trick with that is to move the decimal point 2 spots to the left. So 1, 2, there's my new decimal. So I have 0.179 as a decimal. Now, our job is to create a fraction. So we can just read this decimal. We have tenths, hundredths, thousandths. And so our fraction is 179 thousandths. Okay, and this is what we're circling today. Let's go ahead and do the next one, then we'll plug it into the worksheet. Okay, we have 26 and 1/4. Anytime you can change that fraction to a decimal, do that. So I'm just going to rewrite this as 26.25, but this is still a percent. I didn't do anything or change it to a decimal form yet. We know our trick with changing it to decimal form is dividing by 100 or moving the decimal spot 2 spots to the left. So this gives us 0.2625 with a 0 in front. So there's my decimal. My job, though, is to write a fraction. So I have tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths. And so we have 2625 over 10,000. Okay. Now I have to look and see if I can simplify that. I can definitely divide by 25 over 25. And so let's go ahead and test that out. So 2625 divided by 25 is 105. So we have a 105 on top. And on the bottom, 10,000 divided by 25 puts us at 400. I see a 5 and a 0 as my endings there, so I know that I can divide by 5 over 5 for this. So 105 divided by 5 puts me at 21, and 400 divided by 5 puts me at 80. And there we go with our simplified fraction for that one. Let's go ahead and get it into our worksheet here. Number 7, as a fraction, we have 179 over 1,000, okay, or thousandths. And then as a decimal, we have 0.179 that we had already created there to solve that one. Let's look at number 14 now, 26 and 1/4. As a fraction, we got 21/80ths. And as a decimal, we also had that written as well. We had 0.2625. Okay. All right. Back to our notes. Now we are converting decimals to percents. These are nice and easy. Decimals are the small ones. To go to a percent, we're multiplying by 100, or the trick is just to move the decimal 2 spots to the right. So that puts me at 0.3%. Okay. Now, as a fraction as well, I know I'm going to need to do that for my worksheet. Our fraction is created from the decimal. Okay, and if we look at our original decimal here, we had tenths, hundredths, thousandths. And so I have 3 thousandths, okay, is that location. Now I need to circle the correct thing for my notes though, because we're going decimal to percent. Okay, let's go ahead to 19 on our sheet here. We had 3 thousandths. So I'm going to write that as I already have my decimal there for 3 thousandths. As my fraction though, 3 thousandths. So 3 over 1,000. And then in percent form, we swoop the decimal 2 spots to the right, and it gave us 0.3%. I want to make sure I'm writing in the correct spot. So 0.3%. Okay. All right. I know this makes sense because if I moved it 2 spots to the left, it would give me what we see on the far right, 0.003. All right, next one is not on the worksheet today, and it's a really, really funky one because of this repeating decimal. And so we see that we have a decimal, we want to change it to a percent. Okay, so I know to do that, I'm multiplying by 100, which is 2 swoops to the right, and that gives me 14.2857. But I can't just say that I'm done and this is the percent because I'm not really representing it well because it repeats on forever. The problem is, though, I can't put my bar over the whole thing. We do that repeated bar notation over the decimals. And so 0.2857 isn't really the only thing repeating. So think about what's after the 7 if this repeats. Well, the 1 and the 4 are after the 7. And so this ends up being what is repeating when I move the decimal 2 spots to the right to change it to a percent. Okay. Now, as a fraction, or we're taking this initial number and the decimal turns into a fraction just by reading it. Well, I don't really want to write 1428557 and then whatever that is, what tenths, hundredths, thousands, 10,000s, 100,000, and so on. So let's just take a look. If you remember, we had this fraction to decimal chart, and I want you to look at this section right here with all these repeating decimals and find the one that starts with a 1. Do you see what I'm seeing? That 1/7. So really 0.142857 repeating is simply this as a fraction, 1/7. Okay. And so that's something interesting to be aware of. Also take a look at, can you find 0.285714? That happens to be 2/7. So really for my percent here, I have 14 and 2/7%. And remember, I'm converting each decimal to a percent, so there we go. Okay, is my official answer there. All right, let's go ahead back to our worksheet now. Here we go, and we'll continue where we left off. So next one is convert each percent to a decimal. So when we're going percent to a decimal, remember we're dividing by 100 now because that's what a percent is. It's out of 100 or divided by 100. And so we have a trick as well, though, which is move the decimal 2 spots to the left. Okay. Now, when I do this, if I did this, I'd end up with 0.859, which doesn't make sense, and that's not how we write it. So let's get rid of the 9/10, and let's just rewrite this as 85 and 9/10%. So I'm not changing it from a percent to anything. I'm just getting rid of that 9/10 as a fraction and writing it as a decimal. Okay, so just making it look different. So I still need to change the percent to a decimal. We know that we can divide by 100, so moving it to the left 2 spots. So that puts me at 0.859 as a decimal. As a fraction, we just read that, tenths, hundredths, thousandths. And so we have 859 thousandths. But I'm focusing on the decimal, which is right there. Let's put the 0 in front and record it on our sheet. So we go down to number 16. As a fraction, we have 859 thousandths. And as a decimal, we have 0.859. Okay. All right, let's take a look at the next one here. This is not on the worksheet. We have 45 and 5/9. So let's see what 5/9 is as a decimal. Another thing we can do is just type 5 divided by 9. And unfortunately, it's this 0.5 repeating that we have to deal with. Okay, so let's just rewrite this percent for right now so that we can be moving decimals. We have 45 and 0.5 is repeating percent. Okay, all we have to do is change this to a decimal. We know to do that, we just move the decimal to the left twice or divide by 100, and that gives us 0.455 as a decimal with the 5 repeating. So since I already have 2 5s here, I can just get rid of this one. And I have 0.45 with the bar notation over the 5 because that's what's repeating. And there's my decimal. The fraction would get really funky with this one just because you're having to represent that 5 repeating. And so if you think about it, it ends up being really tricky to represent something like that. You don't need it for this worksheet anyway, so let's call it a day and circle your answer. All right, the last two, we're converting fractions to percents. Okay, we know to do this, one of the easiest things that you could do, you could try to turn this 15 into a 10 or 100. I think that gets a little bit tricky sometimes, and it tends to be a lot easier to just do 11 divided by 15 and get that decimal and move things from there. Now, sometimes you're not going to be able to use a calculator, so you will have to do long division instead of doing 11 divided by 15 on a calculator. So let's just go ahead and do that long division real quick so we can see what that process would look like. So you might have to do 11 divided by 15. 15 times nothing goes into 11. And so we're going to have to put our decimals and tack on another 0 and focus on this 110. Okay, so start thinking 15 times 2 is 30. So 15 times 4 is 60. 15 times 6 is 90. So let's think about 90 plus another 15 is 105. So that would be times 7 gives us 105. Okay. If I subtract, I end up with 5. Bring down my next number. So that gives us 50. Again, 15 times 2 is 30, plus another 15 would be times 3. That gets me 45. So let's go ahead and do 15 times 3 is 45, which leaves us with a 5. Another 0 comes down, and we end up with 50 again, which means this 3 is going to repeat on and on and on. So we end up with 0.73 with the 3 repeating. Let's just test that out. So 11 divided by 15, and you can see we get the same thing. Okay, so we have this decimal of 0.73 with the 3 repeating. How do we change this to a percent? Well, we multiply by 100, move the decimal point 2 spots to the right, okay, and we end up with 73%. The problem is we can't put a 3 on the ones place like that. And so you're going to have to represent the next 3 here as a decimal and put the bar notation over there. Always extend that repeated decimal a little bit more so you can represent it accurately. Okay, so there is our percent. Let's go ahead and fill this in for number 12. Okay, so 11/15 as a percent. We've determined is 73.3 repeating percent. And then as a decimal, we had 0.73 with the 3 repeating. Okay. All right. And that is it for the worksheet part. Let's do this last problem, which is not on the worksheet. We've already done the long division before, so let's go ahead and do it on the calculator. So we have 13 divided by 8. Get us our decimal, which is 1.625. And we know to go from decimal to percent, we multiply by 100 or move the decimal 2 spots to the right, which gives us 162.5%. And think about that, that's over 100%, but if you did get a 13 out of 8 on a test, that would be over 100%, which would be pretty awesome. So circle the percent as your final answer. This is not on the worksheet, so you're all set with that. So there's your more difficult fraction percent decimal type problems, but you can see the process is the same. So now focus your attention back on practice B, and your job then is to go through that process and fill in the blanks for all the other ones. And then you can find those different answers in the code box and figure out the secret word. Good luck.